the urgent matter. What is corroding the Iranian regime right now is not just the visible impact of the war, but an internal economic squeeze that is exposing a regime under growing pressure. On this April 14, 2026, the situation became even clearer. The country is facing a devalued currency, suffocating inflation, protests, sanctions, trade restrictions, and the cost of war that is pushing the system into a deeper crisis. The central line is straightforward. Something is indeed erasing the Iranian regime in a way it hasn't seen in many years. What happened? The Iranian economy has entered a path of severe deterioration. Who is at the center of this? The regime itself, the political and military leadership of Tehran, pressured by conflicts, sanctions, and social unrest. The World Bank stated in an April 2016 report that economic activity was severely shaken by conflict, sanctions, and social unrest. The institution estimates a contraction of 2.7 in the economic year from 2025 to 2026. A currency devaluation of 44 at the beginning of March, and inflation of 62.2 in February, with food inflation reaching 99%. This helps explain why the crisis stopped being just military and became a structural shock. When did this collapse become impossible to hide? At the end of 2025 and the beginning of 2026, when the Iranian currency plunged and discontent moved from spreadsheets to the streets. The Associated Press reported that protests erupted after the rial plummeted to 1.42 million per dollar and then to 1.51 millions. Reuters also reported that the president of the central bank resigned amid the worsening crisis, while inflation had already reached 48.6 in October. Where did this appear most strongly? In Tehran, in the bazaars, in commerce, and in the pockets of ordinary people. How? With higher prices, loss of confidence, and the feeling that the state can no longer protect the value of money. The next blow came from the outside. The war and tension in the Strait of Hormuz increased the stranglehold on trade, transportation, and energy. Reuters reported that the new phase of the conflict led the United States to announce a naval blockade against Iranian ports, with a direct impact on oil flows. The International Energy Agency, in a Reuters report, spoke of the biggest supply shock in history, with a loss of 1.5 million barrels per day in the global market. The IMF and the Associated Press also highlighted that the conflict surrounding Iran is already putting pressure on global growth and inflation. Why does this matter for the regime? Because an already weak system loses even more revenue, more predictability, and more ability to contain the crisis at home. At the same time, the government tries to sell the image that it still controls the situation. The World Bank itself has recorded cuts in exchange rate subsidies, reduction of the quota for subsidized gasoline, and creation of electronic vouchers for the purchase of essential items. According to the report, the announced program provides 10 million rials, about $7 per person, for 80 million citizens. But the document itself says that this only partially offsets the shock to families. This Tuesday, Reuters also reported that Iran's oil minister promised to use part of the recent oil revenue for reconstruction. But this answer gives the impression of a patch, not a solution. It's emergency management, not real recovery. And this is where the most important question arises. Why can this be devastating for the regime? Because regimes like this don't survive on rhetoric alone. They survive on control, on money circulating, on the ability to pay the machine, and to prevent revolt from growing or happening. The World Bank says that 36% of Iranians live on less than $8.30 a day. And it warns of a greater risk of poverty, lack of essential goods, and even mass emigration if conflict and instability continue. The Associated Press showed that the recent protests started because of the currency and the cost of living, but quickly took on a political tone. The interpretation that emerges from this data is straightforward. When money loses value, food takes up more of the budget, and people lose their fear of taking to the streets. The wear and tear stops being economic and becomes a risk to power. In the end, what is erasing the Iranian regime is not a single attack, nor a single blockade, nor a single sanction. It's the explosive combination of war, inflation, weak currency, isolation, internal disorganization, and loss of confidence. Those who ask, the people pay first. Those who feel it later are the very center of power. Where this will end still depends on the duration of the conflict and the regime's ability to keep the machine running. But, looking at what has already been confirmed by the World Bank, Reuters, the IMF, and the Associated Press, the conclusion is harsh. Iran is not only facing a war against enemies from outside, it faces internal corrosion that threatens to consume the regime from within with a rare and deeply alarming force.